Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel. And today's topic is creating macro variables with Proc SQL and 3 ways to use them. Till now we have seen 2 ways of creating macro variables. First one is %let statement and second one is SAS macro parameters. Both these require user input. But while creating macro variable using SQL, it helps us to use data from the table to create macro variables. In this way, it is different from what we have seen before. This helps us avoid hard coding. We will get into at least 3 case scenarios where I will explain you more in detail on this part. And these are great tools to handle metadata. By using Dictionary.tables and macro variable, we can have so many applications, and I have made at least 4 to 5 videos on this topic itself, and link for the same I will give in the description below. Now let us see, by using data, what kind of macro variables we can create. We can create 3 types of macro variable. The first one is we can take a single value from dataset and we can create a single macro variable. And the second type is we can take multiple values from a single variable and we can create multiple macro variables. And the third one is we can concatenate variable values into a single macro variable. Each of these we will be trying to understand with very simple examples. Now let us look into how we can take a single value from data set and put it into a macro variable. To do that, it is super simple. All we need to do is we need to write into and colon followed by macro variable name. This creates macro variable CNT. Now let us try to understand this example better. Now here I have written proc SQL no print because we are interested to create a macro variable. We need not print the whole thing. So I have written no print option in here after proc SQL. Here I am saying select count star into colon cnt from SAS help.class and then quit. What we are doing here is we are taking the value of count and we are creating macro variable cnt. So to create macro variable from proc SQL, it is super simple. All we need to do is into and colon the macro variable name. And we can reference this macro variable name, or we can use this macro variable by doing %put and then by referencing it by ampersand cnt. Here you can see that the value of count is 19. Now let us try to understand little bit more. Whenever we try to take a numeric value and put it into a macro variable, especially when we do it from the data, what will happen is it will create left spaces. And now let us try to understand with the same example we have seen earlier. Everything is same in here what I have shown you earlier, except that now I have a pipe around my macro variable ampersand cnt. Here I have a pipe in the front and a pipe in the back, or you can say pipe towards left and pipe towards right. And when we see the value in the log, we see a space after the left pipe indicating that there is a left space in here. And whenever we want to find the spaces in the log, especially as log has lot of empty spaces, we always try to do something like creating a pipe in front of macro variable or after macro variable or after any values, or we either use star or something, and this tells us whether there is a space or not. Here we can see that there is a space. To remove the space, it is super simple. All we need to do is we need to use trim option after our into colon macro variable. And once we use this trimmed option, and if we are doing the same percent put and we have a pipe and ampersand cnt pipe, here you can see that there is no left space. Till now what we were doing was we were taking a single variable value and we were trying to put in single macro variable. But we can take many single variable values and we can put it into many single macro variables. Now let us try to understand this through an example. Here I have the same example what I have previously shown. In earlier example which we were looking into, what we have done is we have done count star and we have one macro variable created. Here I'm also interested in average age, so after count star comma I'm saying avg and then I'm running it on age and then I'm capturing into two macro variables. And to do that it is quite simple. All we need to do is we need to write colon cnt comma and then we need to write colon avg underscore age. So this count star value goes into this colon cnt, this average age goes into this avg underscore age macro variable. So how many ever values you want to do, what simply you can do is you can follow it with a comma and then you can also create macro variable by putting a comma. And to trim these values is also very simple. All you need to do is you need to say trimmed option after colon macro variable and then comma another colon macro variable and trimmed. And now that we have looked into very simple case wherein we are taking a single variable value and putting it into a single macro variable. Now let's get little bit deeper and let's try to understand how we can create multiple macro variables by using a single variable but by taking it multi values. This is very powerful. But to understand this, now let us try to quickly do an example in here. In here I am saying proc SQL select name from SAS help.class semicolon quit. So what I am interested to see is I am interested to see all the values in the name variable. Here you can see that it has 19 values. I know this value because I work a lot with SAS help.class. And then what you want to do is you want to create one macro variable which has the value of Alfred, the second one will have Alice, and the third one will have Barbara, fourth one will have Carol. Like this, I want to create 19 macro variable and first one will relate to the first one in here and 19th one will relate to 19th value. So to do this, the code is also super simple. What I need to do is I need to write proc SQL again, as I do not want the values to be printed. I am saying no print, and in here I am saying select name into colon nm1 dash or hyphen colon nm19 from SAS help.class and quit. What we are telling in here is I want to create 19 macro variables starting from nm1 and ending from nm19, which means my first macro variable should be nm1, second one should be nm2, nm3, nm4 to nm19. So if you see the values in here, my first macro variable is nm1, it has a value of Alfred, my second value is Alice, and my second macro variable name is nm2, nm3 will have Barbara, nm4 will have Carol, and so on. So that we have looked into it, Let's also do a percent put on ampersand nm1, ampersand nm2 and ampersand nm3. To find these values, we need to do ampersand nm4 to ampersand 19. But before going into that logic, here you can see that nm1 has Alfred, nm2 has Alice, nm3 has value of Barbara. If you see that this is rather tedious to look into these values, and it defeats the whole purpose of looking into the values in this fashion, because we have to type them out. But if you look deep into it, we can find a logic. That is, we have ampersand nm in front of all the values, but our 1, 2, 3, the numbers are increasing. They increase till 19. So what we can do is, we can keep this ampersand nm constant, and we can pass this 1, 2, 3 as macro variables. Now let us see how we can do that. So here what I am trying to show is, we have created these macro variables, 19 macro variables. How we can access those macro variables without writing each one of them separately. Now let's look into how we can do that. And I have written my code on the top again to show what is happening. And here again you can see there are 19 macro variables created, starting from nm1 to ending to nm19. As these macro variables are created outside, these are known as global macro variables. And these global macro variables we can use in a macro. Now, what we are trying to do in here is, I have a macro which has name as check many macvar with do loop. So as I was saying, only 1 to 19 are changing. What we can do is, we can, instead of using 1 and 19, we can use ampersand I. Here, to do that, what I am saying is percent do I equal to 1% to 19. In here, what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to access nm1 to nm19 by doing ampersand ampersand nm ampersand I. Whenever we have more than one ampersand, I have told that it is known as indirect macro variable reference, and I have gone into detail about this into one of my video, but I will go in lesser detail in here to explain this. So in here what is happening is, when I is 1, that is in the first iteration, we have macro variable value I as 1. And in here, when we are starting from ampersand ampersand nm ampersand I, what happens is, these two ampersands will become one ampersand, and this ampersand I resolves and it becomes 1. And now we have single ampersand nm1, and single ampersand nm1 value is nothing more than Alfred, and we see that value in the log in here. Now what happens in the second iteration is, this is going to become ampersand nm2, and then by doing each iteration, we are going to access all the macro variables from nm1 to nm19, and in here you can see in the result in the log after executing this macro that we are able to access all of these values. So whenever we want to access many macro variables which has a starting point and an ending point, we simply can create that starting point and ending point in a percent do loop, and then we can use indirect macro variable reference to access these macro variables. As I said to you earlier, I have covered about this indirect macro variable references in detail in one of my videos, and link for the same I will give in the description below. Now, even though this looks good, it has one important limitation. That is, we need to know how many observations are there in this data set. In this case, I knew that there are 19 observations in SAS help class. If we do not know this one, then we have to open the data set and we have to look into how many observations it has. And by doing so, by writing this manually here as colon nm19 and 19 in here, what we are doing is we are doing certain type of hard coding. What are the problems of this kind of hard coding? The main problem with this kind of hard coding is what happens if somebody wants to add 20 more observations into this SAS help class. Now this whole code becomes void, and this 1 to 19 also becomes void or pretty much useless, because we are not able to take all the values and create macro variables out of it as per our requirement. So to avoid this kind of hard coding, what we can do is we can simply use colon nm1 hyphen, and this started from SAS 9.4 M4. I think you don't have to give really the end value, that is nm19. SAS itself does in the backend. And also, as I said to you, we also want this to be automated, or also we do not want to hard code it, and this is nothing more than a count. So what we can simply do is we can do select count star into count or colon cnt from SAS help class, and then quit. I think I have written quit here, but probably it should be in here. And then I can simply try to access my macro variables by doing %do I equal to 1 to ampersand cnt. This ampersand cnt is nothing more than 19, and in here we are doing indirect macro variable reference and we are accessing all those macro variables. Now let us look into how we can do the same thing in the earlier version than SAS 9.4 M4. In here again the things are pretty simple and straightforward, but with one small change. In here again I am doing select count star into colon cnt and I am saying trimmed. I want my count value to be trimmed. And also in here I am doing select name into colon name1 and then hyphen colon nm ampersand cnt. In here this is going to become colon nm1 hyphen colon nm19. So in here we have to give the upper bound, but again we are not doing this manually, but we are simply using the count value which is captured into a macro variable. And when we come in here, ampersand cnt becomes 19, and now we are accessing all the macro variables as we have been doing previously. Now let me tell you why I have used the option trimmed in here. When I am having colon nm ampersand cnt, if I do not use trimmed, what will happen is this will have space. So it will become colon nm space and 19. So this will cause an error. So after using this option trimmed, what this will become is colon nm 19. Now we have seen how we can create many macro variables from a single variable and how we can access them. Now let us look into something different than what we have previously done. Now what we want to do is concatenate all the values into a single macro variable. If you look into here into the SAS help.class dataset, we have Alfred, Alice, Barbara. If you see, we have one value after another, another after another. Now what we want to do is we want to create a macro variable which have all the values into one single macro variable, but all of these values concatenated with the help of a separator. Now let us see how we can do that. This can be simply done by using the following code, that is select name into colon all names. This is my macro variable, and this style we have been using previously. So we are creating only one macro variable, and also we are saying separated by space. And this is important. We have never used this word separated by and then any delimiter we want to mention in here. Here I am just mentioning space. And when we create this macro variable, if we do %put ampersand all names, this macro variable will have values like this. All the values concatenated as Alfred, Alice, Barbara, Carol, Henry, James. Now I want to discuss couple of things in here. In the separated by, I can give comma, I can give any other delimiter. And once we give a delimiter as comma, again one single macro variable we will have, and this will have the values like Alfred, comma Alice, comma Barbara, comma Carol, comma Henry, so and so forth till William. Now we have looked into how to create macro variables, but we have not gone into details how to use them. Now let us try to understand how we can use the macro variables that were created by Proc SQL into class. And in here I am going to cover three different styles. The first one is by simply using dataset values. And to understand this, let us look into a case study, or let's look into an example by which we can understand more. Here what I want to do is I want to create a table for each student name in SAS help.class. Without macro, how can I do this? Without macro, I need to write something like this. Data Alfred set SAS help.class where name equal to quotes Alfred, run. And for Alice, I need to write data Alice and where name equal to Alice, which everything being same. I need to write the same thing for 17 more names. Whenever we do this kind of thing, we have multiple problems in here. Our code becomes very long. What if we had 50 data sets to create? Then we have to write everything. We need to look into the data set and we need to write again. And one another problem is whenever somebody deletes or adds more rows, this code is not going to work. So long code depending on hard-coded values are the issues when we don't use any macro. And whenever we find that we are repeating most of the code, in this case if you see this code and this code is very similar, but the only thing is changing is dataset name and also the value for our where condition. So this kind of code can be simply made into a macro. Now let us try to make a simple macro. In here I am making a simple macro wherein I am saying %macro simple mac val equal to, and then I am saying data ampersand val set sasl.class where name equal to ampersand val, and I am putting this into double quotes because macro variables are resolved in double quotes, not single quotes. and then run, and then I'm ending my macro with %men. Now I have created my macro, and again I can execute this macro by passing Alfred, Alice and 17 more execution. The code is a little easier, little simpler by putting this into a macro, but still it has quite a few problems. Instead of Alfred, A in the capitals, if I give A in small letter, or if I write the spelling wrong, the data set will not have any rows. So manual entry, and there is an issue, and if somebody adds or removes any rows, then we are going to have a problem, because again we need to add one more execution or 20 more execution. So the approach with a simple data step is repetitive code and hard coding, but whereas with a simple macro, even though we do not have very much of repetitive code, but there is an issue of hard coding. How we can address this? It is again simple, and this is what we have already seen, but let me show you once again how to do this. In here I am creating a macro, and in here I am saying proc SQL no print, and in here I am creating my macro variables by doing select name into colon name1 hyphen from SAS class. This will create 19 macro variables, and I have also have my count star into CNT macro variable, and in here I am doing %do I equal to 1 to ampersand CNT, and this becomes 19, and here I am accessing all the macro variables nm1 to nm19 by doing indirect macro variable reference, and this I am doing for data ampersand ampersand nm ampersand I, and also in my where condition. So this becomes ampersand nm1, means this has a value of Alfred, and this also becomes ampersand nm1, and this becomes Alfred, and this creates our Alfred data set. When it goes to second iteration, it makes it Alice data set, and then it makes Barbara, and so on and so forth till the William. So what is the advantage of this kind of approach? Now we are directly pulling the values from the data set, and we are using them without manually entering it or without hard coding, which means this program is almost the which means we are making this program very dynamic and data driven, and this leads to no manual errors, especially related to values. Now let us quickly try to compile this macro and run this macro. Now I am also compiling and execution in one step, and then in here if you see that I have created 19 data sets, each of them have one single row. So the first approach what I was telling about is simply using dataset values. Now let us try to understand what is the another way that we can use macro variables created into proc SQL into class and solve some problems. And this involves dictionary.tables, and there are some other related tables also which belong to dictionary library. Before going into the details of dictionary.tables, now first let us look into what is the problem we want to solve. Here I want to proc print all data set which start with A in SAS help, and I just want to proc print first 5 rows. Here if you see the SAS help library, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 data sets which start with A as the word. And then how can I solve this without using any macro? Again, I can simply use proc print data equal to and SAS help dot the dataset name which we want to, and then ops equal to 5, run. So I can do for all the 8 datasets very easily. But what is the problem here? If I have 50 datasets, how can I do the proc print? It becomes tedious and it becomes redundant code. And this kind of code, as explained to you earlier, it is better to use macro variables. Now you see everything in here is same except the dataset name is changing. So what I can simply do is I can pass a parameter and then I can execute all these macros by passing the dataset name as a macro parameter. But it is the same problem what I have previously discussed. That is, we are hard coding, we are passing hard coding values. If there are more data sets, then this code is not going to work. If some data set is deleted, the code will have different problems. Now, how can we solve this? We can solve this with the help of Dictionary.tables. Now, let us briefly try to understand Dictionary.tables. I have made couple of videos on how to use Dictionary.tables and Proc SQL into clause, and link for the same I will give in the description below. And I have also discussed about Dictionary.tables little bit more in depth in those videos. And now let's look into Dictionary.tables and what kind of information it has. Dictionary.tables has all the information related to tables which we have in a SAS session. Now let us quickly try to run select star from Dictionary.tables, but let's only look into 5 records real quick. Now when I run this proc SQL out ops equal to 5 select star from Dictionary.tables semicolon quit semicolon, we see that we have 5 rows in which we have the information related to data sets, and in here you can see that we have libname, memname and many other variables, and for our case we do not really need these many variables to understand, but we are interested in two variables. The first one is libname and the second one is memname. If you see here, libname tells about the library and memname says about the dataset name. As I was explaining earlier, we are interested only in SAS help library. So to look into or to get the information from SAS help, we just need to modify our code little bit, and we need to add here a where condition, and we need to say where libname equal to SAS help. It gives us all the tables related to SAS help. Now let us quickly run this piece of code and see the result in here. Here again I am using out ops equal to 5 and it gives me all the 5 data sets. And now I am actually interested in all the data sets which starts with A. How can I do that? After writing where libname equal to SAS help, I just need to say and memname like quote A percent symbol quote, means I want to find dataset names which start with A but it can have anything after A. And let's quickly run this. Now here we can see all the datasets related to A. Now all we need to do is we need to run the same code and make each one of these as a macro variable and run this in the loop to do the proc print. Now let us look into that code. I have placed my code into this macro wherein I am using the same where condition which I have discussed earlier, but I am capturing these memname values into macro variable and the count also into a macro variable. Now we are running the same loop what I have shown you n number of times before, wherein we are saying %do I equal to 1 to %2 ampersand cnt and in this case this is going to be 8, and dsn1 will resolve here as whatever the data set in there, and it will do the proc print, and then when I becomes 2, then this becomes ampersand dsn2, and whatever the value is for ampersand dsn2, that resolves and that also gets printed. And let's now quickly run this code and see what is happening in here. Now here you can see that we have printed 7 data sets in here, sorry, 8 data sets in here. But if you see, even the code is wonderful, it works fine, you don't have to manually do anything. But there is one slight problem with the proc prints in here. We do not know from which data sets these are. To know each proc print belongs to which data set, all we need to do is we need to have the same code, but we need to have a title, and here I am saying title printing of SAS help dot ampersand ampersand dsn ampersand I quote semicolon. Here again I have double quotes because macro variables resolve in double quotes only. And in here this becomes ampersand dsn1, whatever its value is there, that will be printed in our title. Now let us quickly run this code and see what is happening in the result here. Now you can see that it tells us what data set it belongs to also. So not only we have automated a lot of things, but we have proc printed the datasets in a such a way that it tells us which dataset it belongs to. Now that we have looked into two different ways of using macro variables related to proc SQL into clause, now let us look into the third way. The third way is another important way, and it is by creating control tables. Before going into the details of this, now let us look into our requirement. Requirement is to print 5 tables, and this list can change. And also this proc print should be done by 20 people in a team, which means you need something which happens at one place and everybody uses the same thing. Say for example, if I told 20 people to do a proc print of 5 tables, they will do it. If it changes, I need to communicate with again with the 20 people saying that, hey, now you need to add one more data set. So this kind of communication and trying to do without automating is problem. So in these kind of scenarios, what we want is we want a solution in which we are handling everything from one particular table, and this table is known as control table. So this control table will have all the information. In here I have 4 tables, sorry here I have mentioned 5 tables, but I am creating my control table with 4 tables in here. So my table will have all the table names which I wanted to proc print. This is known as control table. And we use this control table and we will create macro variables from this control table, and then we will do the proc print out of it. So what happens if somebody adds a row? It's fine when we are doing dynamic coding like what I've been showing you from past half an hour or so, it will take care of everything. And in here, let's first create our control table which has all the information we need. Now I have created my control table and it has 4 rows. And again, I can proc print by doing the same thing what I've been showing you over and over. That is by doing select and then the variable name into macro variables which we want to create and also count star into count, and then we are doing our proc print, and then let's quickly run this. And here you can see that it has proc printed all the 4 datasets. So if I want to make 20 people to do the same thing, then what I can do is I can create a control table. Here, if I want to add a row, I can simply add a row. That is, I want to proc print one more data set. I can quickly run an insert statement, and this inserts the row. And once the insert is done, I don't have to do anything to my macro, or not even the 20 people who are using that macro has to do anything. So I can simply run my macro once again, and it will proc print this data set too. And now let's see the proc print. It will show the proc print of the data set which I have just added. So apart from directly using the values into data set and also dictionary.tables, control tables is another way to create macro variables by using proc SQL into clause and then solve some problems. Before wrapping up this topic, I would like to inform one another thing. So if you looked into all of our macro variables which I have created, are many macro variables I have created and looped through them. But I have not used a single macro variable of this sort and solved a problem. I will show this kind of solving the problem once I talk about macro functions, and then I will show you how to solve this with the help of percent do percent until and percent do percent while. In that way we will know another way of solving the problems, and also we will know how to use percent do percent while and also percent do percent until in the next sessions. And that's all for this topic. If you like this topic, please give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe. Thank you.